On the distant planet of Zorath, the grand capital stood with its towering crystal spires that reached into the skies, shimmering in the light of two suns. The Zorathians, a race of tall, blue-skinned aliens with advanced technology, ruled over a vast empire that spanned across many planets. Their culture was old, wise, and strict, with traditions that had lasted for centuries. Their people held power, honor, and bloodlines in the highest regard. Princess Lyra, the only daughter of the queen, had always been taught that Zorathians were superior to all other species in the galaxy. Their strength, intelligence, and noble history made them rulers of all they surveyed. It was a belief that was deeply ingrained in her, but it was also one she questioned, at least in secret. One quiet evening, as Lyra walked along the palace grounds, she noticed something strange in the sky. A small, bright light darted across the heavens, growing larger and brighter with each passing second. It was unlike any ship or starship she had ever seen. The object quickly descended and landed in a field just outside the palace walls. Lyra's. Curiosity got the better of her and she ran towards it, her footsteps echoing in the silent night air. When she arrived at the site of the landing, she was met with a strange sight. A large metallic object had crashed into the field. Smoke rose from its damaged hull and sparks flew from the cracks. She couldn't make sense of what she was seeing until she heard a voice. "Hello?" the voice called weakly, coming from inside the wreckage. Lyra stepped closer, unsure of what to expect. Slowly, a man emerged from the wrecked ship. He was unlike anything she had ever seen before. His skin was pale, almost white, and his hair was a deep brown. His eyes, though tired, had a strange depth to them, filled with a mixture of confusion and fear. He was human. The sight of him took Lyra by surprise. She had read about humans in the old archives, but she had never expected to encounter one. Humans were considered primitive and unimportant in the galaxy. They were an afterthought, a species that was forgotten by most. Yet, here he was, standing, in front of her, covered in dust and debris, but still very much alive. "Who are you?" Lyra asked, her voice steady but filled with curiosity. I don't know," the man replied, his voice cracking. "I don't know how I got here." Lyra could see that he was confused, and she felt an urge to help him. Despite the strange circumstances, she knew she had to do something. She extended her hand to him, a silent offer of assistance. The man looked at her hand for a moment before reaching out and grasping it firmly. As soon as their hands touched, a strange feeling washed over her, a feeling she couldn't explain. It was as though a bond had been formed in that instant. "Can you walk?" she asked. He nodded, though he seemed unsteady on his feet. Lyra helped him stand, guiding him away from the wreckage. As they walked together toward the palace, the man looked around in awe. The tall, shining buildings of Zorath stood like giants, and the alien creatures that populated the streets were unlike anything he had ever seen. It was clear that this was no place like Earth. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice still filled with disbelief. "This is Zorath, the capital of the Zorathian Empire," Lyra replied. "And you are on my planet now." The man's eyes widened. "Zorath?" He seemed to be trying to process the information. "How did I get here?" "I don't know," Lyra admitted, "but I'll make sure you're taken care of." They reached the palace, and Lyra led the man through the grand entrance. The palace guards watched them with suspicion, but Lyra ignored their questioning glances. She was determined to help this stranger, though she had no idea why. The human's presence in the palace was a shock to everyone, and word of his arrival spread quickly. Inside, the palace servants tended to the man's needs. They gave him water, food, and fresh clothing, and though he was still disoriented, he seemed to appreciate their care. Lyra stood by his side, offering him comfort, though she could sense his unease. His whole world had changed in an instant. Later, that night, Lyra stood before her mother, the Queen of Zorath, and explained what had happened. The Queen, a tall and regal figure with glowing blue skin, listened carefully, her expression unreadable. "Mother, this human, his ship crashed near the palace. He doesn't know how he got here, but I believe we must help him," Lyra said, her voice firm with conviction. The Queen raised an eyebrow. "A human? You want me to believe that we are now housing a primitive being in our palace?" Lyra nodded. "Yes, Mother. He's unlike any human I've read about. He seems lost, confused. But he's not dangerous. I think we could learn something from him." The Queen's gaze turned cold. "Lyra, do not forget our position in the galaxy. We are Zorathians. We do not associate with such inferior species." Lyra felt a pang of frustration. "I'm not asking you to associate with him. I'm asking you to help him, just as we would any other lost soul." The Queen stood up, her eyes narrowing. "We shall see, my daughter. But do not mistake kindness for weakness. We do not owe this human anything." But Lyra had already made up her mind. She would help him, no matter the cost. As the days passed, Lyra spent more time with the human, whose name turned out to be Alexander. Though they came from entirely different worlds, they found themselves drawn to each other. Alexander's humor, kindness, and bravery in the face of danger intrigued Lyra. She had never met someone like him before, and as for Alexander, he found himself captivated by Lyra's intelligence, her strength, and the way she made him feel, at home in a place so far from his own world. Neither of them could have predicted the bond that was beginning to form between them, but it was real, and it was growing stronger with each passing day. Princess Lyra couldn't stop thinking about Alexander. Since his arrival on Zorath, she had spent every free moment with him. She showed him the wonders of the Zorathian city, took him to the royal gardens, and shared stories of their people's history. Alexander was amazed by everything, from the floating ships that glided above the city to the way the buildings seemed to change color with the shifting suns. It was a world unlike anything he had ever imagined. As they spent more time together, Lyra began to notice something. The more she spoke with Alexander, the more she realized how different he was from the Zorathians. While the Zorathians valued power and bloodlines above all else, Alexander didn't care about status. He asked questions not about what made people powerful, but what made them kind, what made them strong in heart. His views were so different from the teachings she had grown up with, and yet something about his perspective felt right. One evening, after a quiet dinner together, Lyra and Alexander stood in the palace courtyard, gazing at the twin moons rising in the sky. Lyra turned to him, her eyes thoughtful. "Tell me, Alexander," she began, "what is it like to be human?" Alexander smiled, though his eyes held a hint of sadness. "It's simple, I suppose. We're not as powerful as the Zorathians, but we try our best to survive, to make things better for each other." He paused, looking at her. "I think we might be a little broken in a way, but we still try to fix ourselves." Lyra was quiet for a moment, trying to process his words. She had never heard anyone speak so openly before, so honestly. "I've never met anyone like you," she said softly. He smiled again, but this time it was more of a gentle, reassuring smile. "And I've never met anyone like you either, Princess." The soft breeze carried the scent of the blooming flowers, and for a moment, everything felt peaceful. But that peace was soon interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Lyra turned to see two royal guards approaching them, their faces stern and serious. "Princess Lyra, your mother, the Queen, requests your presence immediately," one of the guards said. Lyra's heart sank. She had been expecting this moment for a while, but she wasn't ready for it. She turned to Alexander, her eyes filled with worry. Please don't worry, he said, his voice reassuring. I'll be fine. You go. I'll wait here. Lyra nodded, though she felt a knot form in her stomach. She followed the guards back to the palace, her mind racing. What would her mother say about Alexander? Would she be as cold and distant as she had been in their last conversation? Or would she see what Lyra saw, the goodness in him, the kindness that shone through despite everything that had happened? When she arrived in the throne room, the queen was waiting for her. The room was grand, filled with ornate tapestries and the soft glow of energy crystals embedded in the walls. The queen sat upon her throne, her regal presence filling the room. Her eyes were sharp, her expression unreadable. Lyra, come here, the queen commanded, her voice cold yet calm. Lyra walked forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She knelt before her mother, as tradition dictated, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Mother, Lyra began, I know what you are going to say. The queen raised an eyebrow. Do you? She asked, her tone still calm but carrying a hint of concern. I know you don't approve of Alexander, Lyra said, looking up at her mother, but I ask you to give him a chance. He may be human, but he is kind, noble, and brave. He doesn't care about power or bloodlines. He only wants to help, to learn, and to understand. The queen looked at her daughter with a piercing gaze, as if weighing her words carefully. She leaned forward, her fingers drumming lightly on the armrest of her throne. You speak of him as if he is one of us, the queen said slowly, her voice softening just a little. But he is not. He is not Zorathian. He is not one of our kind. And that matters. Lyra felt a sharp pang of frustration. She had spent so much time defending Alexander, trying to make her mother understand. But the queen's views were not so easily changed. Lyra had always known that her mother held a firm belief in Zorathian superiority. She had been raised with it, and it was deeply rooted in her way of thinking. I know he is not Zorathian, Lyra replied, her voice steady despite the rising tension. But he has qualities that are rare even among our people. He has strength in his heart. He doesn't care about status, about who is better than who. He just wants to make the world a better place. The queen remained silent for a long moment, her eyes narrowing as she thought. Lyra held her breath, waiting for her mother's response. Finally, the queen spoke, her voice low but firm. You are asking me to accept him, despite everything, despite our people's traditions, despite what we stand for. Lyra stood up, her heart racing. I'm asking you to see him as I see him, Mother, as a person, not a species, as someone who has the potential to teach us something we've forgotten. The queen's gaze softened just a little, though the hardness in her voice remained. You are my daughter, Lyra. I would never turn my back on you. But you must understand that the Zorathian Empire cannot afford to show weakness. If we allow ourselves to be swayed by such emotions, by the presence of a human, what will our people think? What will they say about their queen? Lyra felt a weight settle on her chest. She understood her mother's concerns, but she couldn't bring herself to back down. Please, Mother, give him a chance. Not as a king, not as a ruler, but as a person. The queen looked at her for a long time, her eyes calculating. Finally, she sighed, a heavy sound. I will not promise you anything, Lyra, but I will observe this human, this Alexander, and I will see if he is truly as noble as you say. If he is, perhaps there is something to be learned from him. Lyra felt a glimmer of hope. Thank you, Mother, she said, bowing her head. That is all I ask. As the days passed, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The queen had agreed to observe Alexander, but Lyra knew that her mother's approval would be hard to win. The Zorathian court, filled with noble families, and powerful officials looked down on the idea of accepting a human into their world. Though the queen had promised to observe Alexander, Lyra knew her mother's heart was still closed. Meanwhile, Alexander continued to adjust to life on Zorath. He spent his days learning about the customs, language, and technology of the Zorathians. He was a quick learner, always asking questions and showing great curiosity about everything he encountered. Lyra admired his ability to adapt, and their bond grew stronger with each passing day. However, there was a tension in the palace that both of them couldn't ignore. It wasn't just the queen's disapproval. There were whispers in the halls, secret meetings behind closed doors. Some of the palace officials were plotting, worried that Alexander's presence could disrupt the order of things. They saw the growing bond between him and the princess as a threat to their own influence. They feared that if Alexander became too close to the royal family, it could mean a shift in the balance of power. One evening, as Lyra and Alexander were walking in the palace garden, a servant hurried toward them with a message. He bowed before the princess and handed her a small scroll sealed with the royal crest. Lyra quickly broke the seal and read the message. Her eyes widened in surprise. "It's from my mother," she said, her voice a mixture of shock and concern. "She wants to see me immediately." Alexander looked at her with concern. "Is everything all right?" Lyra hesitated, her mind racing. "I don't know, but I must go." She gave him a quick smile before turning to the servant. "Thank you," she said, her voice calm despite the worry building in her chest. The servant bowed and quickly left them. As Lyra walked through the palace toward her mother's chambers, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She had heard rumors of a faction in the court that was not pleased with Alexander's presence. But she had hoped they were just that, rumors. Now, she wasn't so sure. When she arrived at the queen's chambers, she was greeted by two of the royal guards, who silently stepped aside to allow her in. The queen sat in her chair, a stern expression on her face. Lyra could tell that her mother was deep in thought, but there was something else in her eyes, something sharp, calculating. "Mother," Lyra began, bowing respectfully. "You sent for me?" The queen nodded but didn't immediately speak. Instead, she motioned for Lyra to sit. "Yes, Lyra, I've been thinking about the situation with Alexander," she said slowly, her voice measured. "And I've come to a decision." Lyra sat down, her heart racing. "What decision?" she asked. "I've decided that Alexander cannot stay in the palace any longer," the queen said firmly, her voice filled with authority. Lyra's eyes widened in disbelief. "What do you mean? He hasn't done anything wrong." The queen's gaze hardened. "It is not about what he has done, but what he represents. His presence here is a disruption to the order of things. You, as the heir to the throne, cannot afford to be so close to a human. It will weaken our position." "But he—" "No," the queen interrupted. "I've made my decision. Alexander must leave." Lyra's heart sank. She had feared this moment would come, but hearing her mother speak the words aloud made it all the more real. She stood up, her hands clenched at her sides. "I can't let you do that, Mother," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "He's not just a human. He's someone who has proven his loyalty and courage. He saved me when I was in danger, and he has shown nothing but respect for our people. He deserves to be treated with honor." The queen stood up as well, her eyes narrowing. "You are being blinded by your emotions, Lyra. You are the princess of this empire. Your duty is to your people, to your kingdom, not to a human." "I am still the person you raised me to be," Lyra said, her voice growing stronger. "But I believe in something more than just power and bloodlines. I believe in fairness. I believe that what makes someone worthy of respect is not their species or their bloodline, but their heart." The queen's eyes flickered with something, anger, frustration, or perhaps something else, but she quickly masked it with a cold expression. "You will do as I say, Lyra. That is final." Lyra's heart beat faster. She knew her mother's word was law, but she also knew she couldn't let this go. She had to find a way to change her mind, to show her that Alexander had something valuable to offer the Zorathian Empire. But the path ahead was uncertain, and she could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Before she could speak again, the door to the Queen's chambers suddenly opened, and a group of royal guards entered. Lyra's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the leader of the guards, Commander Zarek. He was a trusted member of the royal guard, loyal to the Queen, but Lyra could see the coldness in his eyes. "What is it, Commander?" the Queen asked, her voice firm. "Your Majesty," Zarek said, bowing deeply, "there is something you need to know. There are members of the court who are unhappy with the presence of the human. They see him as a threat, not only to the royal family, but to the stability of the entire empire." The Queen's eyes flashed with fury. "What are they planning?" "They are plotting to have him removed," Zarek said. "There are whispers of an assassination." Lyra's breath caught in her throat. "An assassination?" Zarek nodded grimly. "Yes, Princess. They believe that eliminating him is the only way to restore order. They will stop at nothing to see him gone." Lyra's heart raced as the full weight of the danger sank in. It wasn't just the Queen who was opposed to Alexander. It was the entire court. And now, someone was willing to take matters into their own hands to remove him. "I won't let them hurt him," Lyra said fiercely. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect him." The Queen's gaze softened, but only slightly. "Then you must choose, Lyra. Your loyalty lies with me, with the Empire. You cannot protect him and still remain in my favor." Lyra knew the decision she had to make, but it wasn't one she could make lightly. Alexander's life was in danger, and she had to act before it was too late. The threat to Alexander's life weighed heavily on Princess Lyra's mind. She spent the following days in quiet contemplation, trying to find a way to protect him without crossing her mother. The Queen had made her decision clear. Alexander had to leave the palace, and those in the court who opposed him would stop at nothing to see him gone. Yet, Lyra couldn't bring herself to abandon him. She had already seen the goodness in him, the strength he carried despite being from a completely different world. The palace had grown tense in the last few days. The whispers in the halls were more frequent now, with many wondering if Lyra would choose her human companion over the Zorathian Empire. The courtiers who had once admired her were now avoiding her, uncertain about where her loyalties lay. Lyra met with Alexander in secret as often as she could. Every moment with him made her feel more certain about her feelings, more convinced that he was not only worthy of her affection, but also of a place in the world she knew. One evening, as they walked along the palace's garden, surrounded by the sweet scent of blooming flowers and the sound of soft winds, Lyra could see the stress on Alexander's face. He was worried, and she knew it was because of her. "I can't let them hurt you," Lyra said softly, her voice filled with determination. "But I don't know how much longer I can protect you from my mother." Alexander stopped walking and turned to face her. "I never asked for your protection, Lyra," he said, his voice quiet yet firm. "I never wanted to put you in danger. I know how important your role is here." Lyra shook her head. "That doesn't matter," she said, her voice strong. "You matter more to me than anything else." Alexander smiled faintly, but there was a sadness in his eyes. "I'm not like you," he said. "I don't belong here. I'm just a human. I don't know what I could offer your people." Lyra's gaze softened. "You offer something no one else can. Perspective. A way of thinking that is not bound by centuries of tradition. I've seen it in you. You are kind, you are brave, and you want to make a difference. Not for power, but because you believe it's right." She paused, her hands trembling slightly as she reached out to him. That's what makes you special. That's why I can't let them harm you." Alexander hesitated for a moment before gently taking her hand in his. The touch was warm and comforting, and for a brief moment, it felt as though nothing else in the world mattered. But they both knew that this connection, this bond, was forbidden in the eyes of the Zorathian court. "We need to leave," Alexander said suddenly, his voice filled with urgency. "If staying here means more danger for you, we should go. We can find a place where we can live without all this." Lyra looked at him, her heart heavy with the thought of leaving everything behind. "I can't just run away," she said, her voice breaking. "I was born to be the future queen of Zorath. I have a duty to my people, even if they don't understand me." Alexander's eyes were soft, but there was a determination there as well. "Then let's make them understand. Let's show them that what matters isn't bloodlines, but the strength of your heart." Lyra gazed at him, her chest tight with emotion. She had never felt so torn in her life. She could stay and fight for him, or she could do as her mother, demanded and protect her kingdom's traditions. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that she couldn't ignore what was in her heart. Alexander had given her a new perspective on what it meant to be strong, what it meant to lead with love rather than fear. "We'll find a way," she said, her voice firm once more. "We'll fight for what we believe in, together." Later, that night, as the stars twinkled in the dark sky, Lyra lay awake in her chambers, unable to sleep. The weight of her choices pressed on her. She could sense the danger drawing nearer, and her heart raced with every passing moment. Alexander had become more than just an ally. He had become her partner, her equal. But the court would never accept him. Not like this. And her mother would never accept him. The next day, Lyra visited her mother once again, determined to make one final plea. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she couldn't keep running from the truth. She had to speak out, even if it meant risking everything. When she entered the queen's chambers, the air was thick with tension. The queen, seated upon her throne, did not look up as Lyra approached. "Mother," Lyra said, her voice calm but filled with resolve. "I need you to listen." The queen's sharp gaze met her daughter's. "What is it now, Lyra?" she asked, coldly. "I can't let you harm Alexander," Lyra said firmly. "He's not just a human. He's someone I care about. And I believe that he has something important to offer our people. Not just through power or blood, but through his heart and mind. He sees the world differently, and that's exactly what we need." The queen's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a slight sneer. "You are speaking of the impossible. He is not one of us. He cannot rule beside you. He cannot be part of our empire." Lyra stood tall, her heart racing. "Then you are asking me to choose between him and my duty to Zorath," she said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "But my duty has always been to do what is right, and I believe this is right." The queen was silent for a long moment, her eyes fixed on her daughter. For a brief second, Lyra saw something in her mother's gaze, a flicker of uncertainty, perhaps even a hint of fear. But it was gone as quickly as it had come. "You are choosing a human over your own people," the queen said, her voice cold. "You will regret this." Lyra held her ground. "I don't believe I will. I believe that this is the future Zorath needs. Not one bound by old traditions, but one where everyone is treated equally, no matter their species." For the first time in what felt like forever, the queen looked away. She seemed lost in thought, her face unreadable. The tension hung in the air, thick and oppressive. "Go," the queen finally said, her voice low. "Do what you must. But understand this, Lyra. This will change everything." Lyra nodded, her heart heavy but full of conviction. She left her mother's chambers, knowing that the path ahead would not be easy. But she also knew one thing for sure: she and Alexander were in this together, and whatever the future held, they would face it side by side. The morning after Lyra's confrontation with the queen was filled with a heavy silence. The air in the palace seemed to hum with tension as the courtiers waited, whispering behind closed doors. The royal court had heard rumors of the princess's defiance, and they were eager to see how the queen would respond. As for Lyra, her heart was heavy, but she felt more certain than ever about the path she had chosen. She had made her decision, and now there was no turning back. Alexander remained at the palace, but Lyra knew their time together in secret was running out. The whispers were growing louder. The court's distrust of the human outsider was clear, and they wouldn't be content until he was removed from the palace. Lyra was determined to protect him, but she knew that the time for secret meetings and whispered conversations was over. The time for action had come. The queen, as expected, had made her own plans. Lyra received a summons late that afternoon to meet her mother in the royal hall. The summons was clear. The queen was ready to confront the growing unrest within the court, and Lyra's loyalty would be tested in front of everyone. When Lyra arrived at the royal hall, she saw the usual faces of the high-ranking nobles, the royal advisors, and even a few of the royal guards. The queen was seated upon her throne, her expression as cold and regal as ever. Lyra stood before her, her heart pounding in her chest. "Princess." "Lyra," the queen's voice echoed throughout the hall. "You have made your choice, and now the consequences of that choice will be revealed to the people." Lyra swallowed hard, but held her head high. "I will not turn away from Alexander. He is not a threat to our people. He deserves a chance to show his worth." The queen's lips tightened, but she said nothing. Instead, she gestured to one of the royal advisors. The advisor, a tall and stern Zorathian named Varek, stepped forward, holding a large scroll. He unrolled it, his eyes scanning the document as if preparing to make an official announcement. "By the will of the queen," Varek began, "a trial will be held to determine whether or not this human, this Alexander, should remain in the palace, or if his presence here is a threat to the Zorathian Empire." The room fell silent. Lyra could feel all eyes on her. A trial. It was not something that had ever been done for someone of Alexander's kind. It was clear the court wanted to make an example of him, to show that the royal family's bloodline was not to be challenged. Lyra stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "This is unjust," she said. "The trial is not about his worth. It is about whether or not we accept a man from another world, a man who has shown nothing but kindness and bravery." The queen's gaze turned sharp. "Enough, Lyra," she said coldly. "Your love for this human will cloud your judgment. If you cannot see the threat that he represents, then perhaps it is time for others to decide." Lyra's heart ached. She had hoped that her mother might see reason, that she might understand how much Alexander meant to her. But the queen's mind was made up. She was determined to protect the Zorathian way, no matter the cost. "The trial will begin at once," Varek announced. "We will see if this human is worthy of remaining in the palace, or if his presence will lead to the downfall of our great empire." Lyra clenched her fists at her sides. She knew what this trial would be. It would be a spectacle, a chance for the court to pass judgment on Alexander. And she had no doubt that they would do everything in their power to find him unworthy. But she also knew something else. She couldn't let that happen. Not without a fight. Over the next few hours, the royal hall was transformed into a courtroom of sorts. The walls were lined with guards, and the nobles took their places in the large seats that surrounded the center of the room. At the far end, the queen sat upon her throne, her eyes focused on the proceedings. Lyra and Alexander stood together at the center of the hall, facing the court. The tension in the air was thick, and Lyra could feel her pulse quickening. Alexander, though clearly nervous, stood tall beside her. He looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and concern, but his expression was steady. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to back down now. The trial began with Varric asking the first question. Alexander, human of unknown origin, what is your purpose in the Zorathian Empire? Alexander stood straight, his voice calm but firm. My purpose is simple, he said. I am here to learn. I am here to understand the Zorathian people and to show that we are not so different. I may not be of your world, but I believe that we can all learn from one another, the court murmured. Some of the nobles were skeptical, others clearly upset by his answer. But there were a few who seemed to be listening, nodding thoughtfully. Lyra kept her eyes on Alexander, willing him to stay strong. Varric's next question was sharper, more pointed. Do you believe that your presence here, among the Zorathian elite, is not a challenge to our way of life? I do not believe it is a challenge, Alexander replied. I believe it is an opportunity to show that there is strength in unity, in understanding. I know that humans and Zorathians are different, but that does not mean we cannot work together. The queen's eyes narrowed. And yet you have already disrupted our court, she said. You have made my daughter question the very foundation of our empire. Do you think that is harmless? Alexander took a deep breath, his gaze never wavering from the queen. I never intended to disrupt anything, but I believe that change can be a force for good, and sometimes it takes standing up for what is right to make that change. The court was quiet for a moment, the weight of Alexander's words hanging in the air. Lyra felt a surge of pride. She had never been more certain of her feelings for him. He wasn't just any human. He was someone who had the courage to speak the truth, even in the face of overwhelming opposition. Varric continued to press, asking more questions, but Lyra could see that the court's stance was beginning to shift. The nobles were starting to question the queen's position, and some were even whispering among themselves. The trial lasted for hours, but by the end, it was clear that the queen's power was not as unshakable as she had believed. The members of the court were divided, some agreeing with the queen, while others began to see the wisdom in Alexander's words. Finally, the queen stood, her expression cold as always. The trial is over, she said. We will deliberate, and a final decision will be made. Lyra's heart was in her throat. She had no idea how the court would vote, but she knew one thing. No matter what the outcome, she would stand by Alexander. Their bond was stronger than blood, stronger than tradition, and she would fight for it until the very end. The night after the trial was long and filled with uncertainty. Lyra couldn't sleep. She paced around her chambers, her thoughts racing. The court had been divided. Some of the nobles were sympathetic toward Alexander, while others remained, fiercely loyal to the old ways. She knew that the queen would be the one to make the final decision, and Lyra feared the worst. The queen's power had always been absolute. The Zorathian Empire had thrived for centuries because of its traditions and its unyielding leadership. But the court had seen something different in Alexander. He had shown them a vision of a future where humans and Zorathians could coexist, where strength was measured not by bloodlines, but by the strength of one's heart. Lyra felt torn. She had always respected her mother, but now she wasn't sure if her mother's vision of the future was the one she wanted. If the queen rejected Alexander, it would mean the end of everything Lyra had come to believe in. It would mean that the empire would continue down its old path, clinging to the belief that only the powerful mattered, that bloodlines were the measure of worth. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, and Lyra's heart leapt in her chest. It was one of the palace servants, sent to bring her to the queen. This was it. The moment of truth had arrived. Lyra followed the servant through the palace halls, her mind swirling with questions. She was nervous, but there was also a strange calmness inside her. She had made her choice, and she had done everything in her power to show the court and her mother that Alexander was worthy of respect. No matter the outcome, she would not regret standing by him. When she entered the throne room, the atmosphere was heavy. The queen was seated on her throne, her expression as cold as ever. She was flanked by several of the royal advisers, including Varric, who had been the one to lead the trial. The court was silent, waiting for the queen's decision. Lyra stood. Before her mother, her hands clasped tightly at her sides. She did not bow. She was no longer a frightened daughter in the presence of a powerful queen. She was a princess who had made a choice and was ready to face the consequences. The queen's gaze was sharp as she studied Lyra. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. "Lyra," the queen began, her voice steady but tinged with authority. "You have made a decision that defies the traditions of our people. You have chosen a human over your own kind, over your own blood." Lyra took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. "I have chosen what I believe is right," she said. "I have chosen Alexander because I see his worth. I see his heart, his courage, and his desire to help, not just for himself, but for all of us." The queen's expression softened slightly, but her tone remained firm. "You speak of him as though he is one of us, but he is not. He cannot be. He is a human. He cannot rule beside you. He cannot be part of the Zorathian Empire." Lyra's heart sank, but she did not back down. "He is more than just a human. He is someone who has taught me that there is more to strength than bloodlines. He has shown me that kindness and bravery are qualities that we can all share. He is worthy of respect." The room was silent as the queen gazed down at her daughter, her fingers resting lightly on the arm of the throne. It was clear that the queen was deep in thought, torn between her loyalty to the empire and her love for her daughter. Finally, the queen spoke again, her voice quieter than before. "I have watched you, Lyra. I have watched you fight for him. Stand by him, despite everything that has happened. I have seen the way the court has reacted, and I know that the power of the Zorathian Empire has been shaken because of this. But—" The queen paused, her gaze flickering toward Alexander, who stood at the far end of the room, waiting in silence. Lyra's eyes followed her mother's gaze, and her heart swelled with hope. She could see the shift in her mother's expression. There was a crack in the armor of tradition, a glimmer of understanding. "But," the queen continued, her voice soft but resolute, "I have also seen the bond between you and Alexander. I have seen the way you believe in him, the way you trust him. I have seen the strength of your heart, Lyra, and perhaps that is what we need more than anything else." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. Could it be? Could her mother finally be seeing things her way? The queen stood, her regal presence filling the room. "You are the future of this empire, Lyra. It is your choice to make. But you must understand that by choosing this path, you are not only changing your own future, you are changing the future of Zorath." Lyra's voice was soft but steady. "I know. I'm ready." The queen looked at her daughter for a long moment, her eyes filled with a mix of pride and uncertainty. Finally, she nodded slowly. "Then, so be it." The queen turned to Alexander, who had remained silent throughout the conversation. "You, human, are not the enemy," she said. "You are not an outsider. But you must understand that the empire you stand in is not like your own. There are laws, there are traditions, and there are those who will never accept you." Alexander stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "I understand, but I will prove that I am worthy of your respect. I will prove that I can help, not only Lyra but all of Zorath." The queen studied him for a moment, her gaze piercing. Finally, she spoke. "Very well. You may stay. But know this, your actions will determine your future here. You will not be treated as a Zorathian, but as a guest. You will be watched. Lyra felt a rush of relief and joy. Her mother had agreed, and Alexander was now part of their world. The path ahead would not be easy, but it was theirs to walk together. I will do everything in my power to prove myself, Alexander said, his voice full of determination. The queen nodded, a rare flicker of approval in her eyes. Then prove it. As the court began to murmur in surprise, Lyra stepped forward and took Alexander's hand. For the first time, she felt as though she was not alone in her fight. The future of Zorath was uncertain, but Lyra knew one thing for sure. She and Alexander would face it together.